All right, so welcome. Spring is, well, spring is in the air is what I was about to say, but I was hoping spring would be in the air for this week. That's not quite the case. If you are out in the Northwest, it's like the chilliest week of winter right now, and really there's not a whole lot of spring fever going on, but really, in the whole scheme of things, in a typical year, we would just be at this point days away from the very first blue orchard bees emerging. And so I was hoping that this presentation could be timed with that fever in place, but maybe some of you got it anyway, just because you know that that's just around the corner. Unfortunately, the 10-day forecast doesn't signify that that's happening, but it's going to happen. It's going to happen. The world keeps spinning the way it typically has spun all these millions of years. We'll have blue orchard bees around. So this is all about raising blue orchard bees. It's what it takes over the course of a year to raise them. There's a lot to it. Maybe you're thinking about starting your own hotel. Maybe you have your own hotel. Hopefully there's something in this for you. So this is my story as a blue orchard bee keeper, and it starts in 2014, and it starts at this little drainage hole. I think it's a drainage hole. I don't quite know what it is. There's holes in my windows. So holes in lots of windows. Well, anyways, these holes can be very valuable for wildlife because I'm sitting out on a Sunday afternoon in 2014, and this insect comes flying in and out of this hole, and this like repeat process in and out. It's right next to me. It's like happening right over my shoulder as I'm sitting on a chair. I'm like, what in the world is that? And kind of, it's kind of funny because I'm a teacher, and I was dropping a student off at their home like a few days before, and he's like, hey, dude, you got to see my mason bees. I want to show them to you. And so I walked into his backyard, and I thought, oh, that's the coolest thing. So my brain was kind of tuned to what a mason bee looked like, and there I was seeing it at my house a few days later, and it was just so exciting. So I was like, I'm gonna spring into action. Maybe I can raise some of these bees or manipulate this small population living in my window to be a large population. Wow, that was quite prophetic, because I went out and got myself a whole bunch of these tubes. They look like tubes. These are actually Phragmites reeds. Do you know what Phragmites are? It's this nasty wetland plant that grows all across the continent in this sort of horrific, non-native invasive way. But they're really good for making reeds for blue orchard bees. And so I went out and bought a whole bunch of these, and you could see that they have like kind of mud packed in them. That's the bee filling up the nest. This is 2015, and I also had a piece of wood laying around the yard, so I drilled some holes in it, and see that there's mud filling those up too. So 2015, I started getting some numbers, and you can see the window in the background, actually in the window hole in the background there. So I placed it right by the window because I figured that was fine habitat for them. And so I had, maybe a few dozen nests the second year. Third year, 2016, I decided I was going to make this really, I thought, fun-looking, extensive bee hotel, where I, once again jammed a whole bunch of reeds into these triangular-shaped tent-like hotels, and I made these like triangle shapes because I wanted to take pictures of the bees and like to get the flash over the picture. I didn't want like something in the way, so I could move my camera over these little houses, I guess. And so I thought that, well, that's gonna, really set me up for a long time. I'm gonna, be able to raise lots of bees in this, and I've really hit the big time. But as time went on, my bees started growing in number. My dad and I built this shelving unit, and I started to add boards into it. Those are laminates or bee boards. You may have seen those at your local nursery, maybe purchased some online. There are lots of boards that kind of sit on top of each other, so you could take them apart and take the cocoons out and monitor it really easily. And then I was thinking, I filled this up that year. You can see like the start of another hotel, like on a post behind it as well. I filled those up. And so 2018, I was like, really like, oh my gosh, this is growing fast. And so once again, my dad and I, my dad's a great woodworker, built this whole bee structure. I call it the Biosk. and it's able to hold 12,000 nests. So in a course of 5 years, I went from the one nest in my window to this massive structure. And I put everything into this really. And well, my numbers continued to grow. And I won't go on and on about it, but this is what my yard looks like today. And it's really just pieces of my yard. There's structures everywhere. My one nest in a window has turned into tens of thousands of nests and many bee boards. This is really just, yeah, there's way more to it. The one kiosk, which is two-sided, you see that right there on the lower right, has turned into two main units like that. My whole front porch, the poor people who have to deliver my mail have to walk through a cloud of bees for 2 months out of the year. And then all around the garden, the house, the barn, wherever I could slip bees in, I've put them in. And there's really no sign of this growth letting up. Really, the only thing that's tempered the growth was last spring. If any of you have, probably all of us lived through last spring in the Northwest, that was a pretty treacherous year for growth. Actually went backwards, lost about 2/3 of my numbers, but we won't talk about 2022. All right, so so I'm growing tens of thousands of bees. This is a little blue orchard bee male, and he's walking at the edge of one of my release boxes, and behind him is just a sea of cocoons that are all harvested and ready to hatch out. So that's what that leads to. All these nests, of course, create extraordinary amounts of bees and of expansion of numbers of bees. So before I get into all the nitty-gritty about what it takes to raise the bees successfully over the year and expand your bee colonies and keep your bees healthy, just to make sure we're on the same page here, I'm going to talk about what is a blue orchard bee. Maybe some of you are kind of new to the bee thing, so let's talk about it. Here's a picture of a blue orchard bee flying into a hole in bee laminates. Keep that picture in mind because I'm going to talk a little bit about some features on that. All right, so a blue orchard bee it's a chunky greenish bee. I say chunky just in stature. It's kind of like a wide looking bee, and it's they call the blue orchard bee. They're really quite green. I mean, there's like tinges of blue on them, but really green orchard bee in our neck of the woods would be, just be far more fitting. They're in the genus Osmia, which is the mason bees. And I'm sorry for those of you who are trained in the arts of taxonomy that my font here did not offer me an italic version. So the Osmia is sitting there in non-italic form. So the mason bees are the genus Osmia, and they're in the family Megachilidae. Megachilidae is a family of bees that includes of course, the mason bees, but it also includes the leafcutter bees, which are well-known summer bee residents around here, resin bees, pebble bees. I'm sure I'm forgetting some of the other common names of bees that are associated with them, but there's many genera that go under the family Megachilidae. The blue orchard bee is also called the orchard mason bee. Those names are used interchangeably as common names. They're native across much of the United States and southern Canada. They nest in cavities, so like if you don't floss your teeth, they might move in. No, just kidding. When I say cavities, you saw those tubes and those holes in the boards. That's where they like to nest. So that's a cavity. It's kind of like a space, a nook or a cranny. That's what blue orchard bees like to get themselves into. They're solitary bees, but they're going to nest but they can nest in very dense aggregations in managed bee hotels. So a solitary bee, what does that mean? That means that the bees kind of do their own thing. They live solitary lives. There's nothing that they achieve with the help of another bee, even their own species. However, they will live together in what we call a hotel. It's kind of like a hotel in the human world, where it's a whole bunch of people who don't know each other, who are hanging out in separate rooms doing their own thing. So they are a solitary bee. It's not like a beehive, a honey beehive, where the bees are really working together towards a common goal, and have their places in the in their roles within the hive. Each bee in the blue orchard bee world is kind of like her own queen, each female bee, and they run their own show. Blue orchard bees are used agriculturally for pollination of some crops, notably cherry trees and almonds. Often they're mixed in with honeybees for various reasons, to achieve pollination for some growers, depending on their mission. And commercial sale, you may have noticed, is widespread at nurseries and online. You'll see different companies selling the bees, and of course selling the apparatuses that you can use for nesting. Right. And I'm sorry, but my screen is not changing. Okay, weird. Okay, so I clicked on it and now it is changing. All right, so here's the bees side by side, a couple portraits on a white background that I took of the male and a female. The female is about the size of a honeybee, and as I mentioned before, she's chunky and she's wide-bodied. She's got a really big head relative to the small compound eyes. The eyes, when you do look at one, you're like, well, those eyes kind of get lost in the size of that head, even though in that image they seem to be readily noticeable. She's got these pollen carrying hairs under her abdomen, which unfortunately aren't visible in this picture, but you'll see them in other pictures. You probably saw them in that picture I was telling you to take a close look at before, and I can go back to that too. So she carries the pollen from the flowers that she visits back to the nest in those hairs under her abdomen. The abdomen is that sort of aft part of the bee, the rear part, the butt of the bee. And she's got these really large mandibles. And mandibles are the like teeth for an insect. And you'll see those in a picture that I'll show in a minute. The male is quite different looking than the female. Still retains that same kind of greenish color, but a little on the lighter green side, actually. The male has a thinner body with a smaller head, and his eyes are pretty large in relation to the size of a head, contrary to the female. The male has this really characteristic white tuft of hair on the face. They have these larger antennae. They have very small mandibles, and they usually emerge much sooner than, or several weeks or several days ahead of the females. Here's a picture of the male and female from the front, which is a perspective that you didn't get from those portraits. And there they're hanging out at some Phragmites reeds. The female, of course, taking ownership of that Phragmites reeds. That's her nest. The male just kind of lurking at the edges, seeing if there's a female that he can copulate with. You see that males of the genus Megachilidae, which is the family Megachilidae, which is the family that encompasses the, like I was saying, the masons, the leaf cutters, the resin bees, the pebble bees. Often the males are really kind of cute. That's kind of a weird thing to say. I'm not an entomologist, so I have all the right in the world to say that insects are cute, I guess. But you could see that the males here, they're kind of no exception. I don't know, maybe that's just my own perspective, but they really, the plush doll world needs to like get on board with males in the family Megachilidae.
I agree with you, Joe.
Well, thank you. All right, so yeah, I got two young daughters. I'd love to get them a stuffy with them. The female, not so much. She's just kind of looks like she's all business, right? She's got these huge mandibles, and those are for carrying the mud that they use to seal off their nest chambers. And like there's a mass amount of mud that needs to be moved in relation to the body size of these females, and they need these big, strong mandibles to carry that. All right, some pictures of the male. I was talking about how cute they are because they're really stinking cute. Look at this guy chewing out of the cocoon right here. He's looking at this furry, cozy cocoon, and he's sticking his little arm out. He's got his antennae sticking out. And here's one from in front. That characteristic white patch of hair is really kind of fun. And then here's one on a flower, a borage flower. And if you're a botanist or a gardener, you probably know that borage isn't something that blooms around the early springtime when blue orchard bees come out. But I do find out that if you grow it in a greenhouse and you plant the seeds in September, those plants will be really big and full of flowers for your bees when they wake up in March. All right, here's some pictures of the female. And she's, once again at the nest with Phragmites reeds, spreading her wings out. This is one in the lower right-hand corner. She's at the laminate bee boards. It's a cold day. I took that picture where the bees, it's kind of funny. It's like a whack-a-mole game. They sort of stick their heads out of the holes periodically on cold days just to check to see if it might be time to fly. And then who can tell me what flower that female blue orchard bee is on in the upper right, that pink? Come on, Washingtonians.
Rhododendron?
Oh, it's the state wildflower, Pacific rhododendron. Yeah, state wildflower. So rhododendron macrophyllum, is that it, Kate?
Don't ask me. I don't.
All right.
Tony's hand is up.
Tony's hand is up.
I thought it was something else. So
okay. Well, it's the state wildflower, which only actually grows in very small portions of the state. And if you ever want to grow it in your garden, good luck. Good luck. You're going to need it. It is a finicky plant. And you wouldn't think a rhododendron would be that. Anyways, blue orchard bees like it. So blue orchard bees, their range is, here you go, a range map from iNaturalist, if you're into the iNaturalist thing. It's all over the US and into southern Canada for the reports. And you can see that huge density of reports in the Pacific Northwest. They just do very well out here. All right, so the blue orchard bees, they have, what's that?
Can I ask you a quick question, Joe?
Yeah.
Look at that one side. It seemed like that's not a lot of observations. Are there not a lot of Osmia species? Or, I mean, sometimes if you pull up like rhododendron, the whole United States would be full of dots. That, they aren't rare though, are they?
Well, I think we're used to seeing them being very prolific west of the Cascade Mountains. And so, no, they aren't rare here. However, I've done a lot of travel in the East, and I can say that, I've only seen them in kind of sparse numbers in comparison to out here. And, I'm not always traveling in springtime, so I don't know what it's like always from place to place. But in times I have, I guess I haven't noticed them in that same abundance, nor have I, I keep acquaintances throughout, throughout the country, and heard of people who have some of the same success and numbers of bee raising in other parts of the world. But I'm not sure if that's really that's my anecdotal observation, or if that's has scientific backing to it. And Lisa has her hand up.
Just that I don't identify any of them because I can't tell those from any of the other Osmias, and there's a lot that look really alike.
Here.
Yeah, this map is only showing this one species. So
thank you for the clarification. Yeah, thank you for the clarification. Yeah, thank you. Because and it might just be the scale. So pardon me, but thank you.
All right, so blue orchard bees, they're becoming famous for some good reasons.
Karen got her hand raised, Joe.
Oh, yes, Karen.
Sorry, just on the nerd geeky end of things. Osmia has a subgenus also called Osmia, known as Osmia sensu strictu. So in the subgenus Osmia, there are only 2 described species in the US, Osmia lignaria and Osmia ribiflores. Ribiflores is obviously a specialist on ribes. And so the 2 of those species aren't all that common because they are only in the areas that they enjoy. But what was I going to say? Oh, so they've been moving across the country faster with the growth of big cities because we have our flowers growing earlier in the year than you normally would without added, people watering their gardens. So for instance, Osmia ribiflores just moved into New Mexico a little bit ago into the big cities where people water their yards, but there's no ribes in bloom down there. So it's done a host switch onto Oregon grape. Anyway, just some added nerdy stuff.
Yeah.
Not nerdy, very interesting.
Yeah, so the bee populations are really dynamic, and so these bees kind of are one of the species, I guess, few species that seem to benefit from human existence. I'm sure there's a more elegant way of saying that. Yeah, so they're doing all right. So one of the reasons they're doing all right is because they're really talented pollinators. Blue orchard bees, one of the quotes you see in media reports and stuff like that, 400 blue orchard bees, we'll call them bobs, can equal 15,000 honeybees, which is roughly like a hive of honeybees. So 400 blue orchard bees can do the work of that many honeybees. And how do they do that work? Well, they carry the pollen on their lower part of their abdomen in a really dry, loose form. And that's contrary to the honeybee, the European honeybee, because if you've ever looked at a honeybee up closely, you'll see that on their legs, they carry the pollen on their hind legs, and they gum it up into a form where the pollen can't really loosely fall off. It stays really secure on the honeybee's legs. Whereas the blue orchard bee just kind of hastily puts it on the bottom of their abdomen, and it's dry, it's not gummy, and it can't really exchange, and it exchanges much more easily between the flowers that it visits. So some pollen grains fall off while others get added. Whereas the honeybee tries to just accumulate as many pollen grains as it can, and then gums them up and then flies away. So you have a much more efficient situation when you have pollen grains that are free and can move more easily. So also blue orchard bees venture out when the skies are cloudy and there's low temps. And when this are conditions when a lot of other bees, in fact, most other bees, are going to stay put. So even last year, when it barely ever got sunny last spring and barely ever got over 55 degrees, there were, I still had a third of my typical production from the blue orchard bees because they still go out when it's cold. And that's an advantage for growers when certain years occur, like 2022, and your honeybees aren't necessarily willing to leave the hive. Also, blue orchard bees, their flight season is spring. So these are when fruit trees are blooming. Your apples, your almonds, your cherries are blooming. So they're well timed for that. All right, so let's talk about mason bees just in general. Blue orchard bees in the lower right here is a selection of just 6 different mason bees. There was just a mention of Osmia ribiflores. That's in the upper right. There's a male of that, kind of like a bluish mason bee. You can see that the mason bees are kind of a beautiful group. They have nice fine lines to their look. Look at that one in the lower left. That's Osmia aglaya, one of the most stunning bees you'll find on this continent, in my opinion. It's aquamarine colors on it, kind of a gradient from kind of a brighter green front to a darker blue, royal blue back, iridescence. And you see that with a lot of mason bees. They're just beautiful, and they're kind of one of those stunners when you show people who are new to bees, when they see the mason bees and they see them looking green, and there's this note there's no perception in their mind that there could be such a thing as a green bee. The mason bee really gets people curious. All right, so it's one of many different kinds of mason bees. All right, so let's talk about the Blue Orchid Beekeeper's year, and just what goes into this. Their year is not, unfortunately, not timed to our calendar. Really, New Year's Day for Blue Orchid bees is right around now. It's right around February. When that's when I kind of think that I'm beginning the process. I'm not ending the process of last year's bees. And so where I'm at right now, in February on this chart is, I'm stocking my hotels right now. Every day I go out, I add a few more tubes. It's a huge process. I get my kids involved. I got an 8 and a 6-year-old. They come out and help me out with it. And I'm going to talk a little bit more in depth about what that whole process is of getting things going, but I'm really filling up the hotels right now. I'm also kind of coming to the end of last year's efforts, where my last bees that I'm harvesting out of their cocoons are getting harvested, and I'm cleaning the last bunch of bees in their cocoons. So, as things taper off from last year, I'm beginning, there's all this optimism for this year. I talked about the bee emergence is coming right around the corner. March 7th was my earliest male. Males, start to emerge in March, and they emerge all the way through March to mid-April. The females are going to follow suit in a few weeks. A lot of that's also dependent on when I find the weather suitable and I decide to actually take my bees out of the fridge and release them. But in the, all things left to nature, like if I look at the bees emerging out of the holes in my windows, which I can't harvest, can't clean or anything like that, that's usually the schedule that they're on. So this is the Blue Orchid bee schedule. So we're finishing up with their stage of being a cocoon, which is a holdover from last season. Their flight season's about to begin. That's going to go till about mid-June, where their season as larvae begin, which goes to about late August. And then starting in September is when I can be sure that most all my bees are in cocoon form. And then, of course, I'd say that their schedule doesn't necessarily follow our calendar. They're staying in their cocoon form until their own New Year's. So starting really soon for me is this extreme stress time. This is my own personal stress, where there's a whole number of factors that I need to take into account to make sure that my mason bees are successful. So there's a lot of monitoring of the weather, a lot of monitoring of what the available resources are for plants or flowers. There's a lot to get ready. You'll see that over here, I got big leaf maples written. That's super important. I'll talk more about that. There's parasite patrol. I'll talk more about that. And then, so obviously I've got to take down what I started, and then there's time to harvest. So I'm going to get into a little bit more detail on all those bits of this little time map here. All right, so stocking the hotels. This is my first video. Let's see if this works. Is everyone seeing me stock the hotel?
Yep.
Yes.
All right. All right. So this is me a few years ago, just getting my big kiosk all set up. I've got the bee laminates in the center. I'm putting the natural Phragmites reeds on the edges. I change it around every year. Yeah, it doesn't really matter where I put the reeds or the boards. They fill up anyway. But and there's that's what's going on right now. I'm stocking the hotels. I'm going out there every day. When I go for a walk, I work from home a lot of the time. I go for a little walk. I grab a bunch of bee reeds, throw them into the hotel, or a laminate or something like that. That goes on throughout the yard. All right, in the coming weeks, once this weather system we seem to be stuck in decides it needs to pass, I'm going to be really paying attention to the weather a lot. I'll be checking the 10-day forecasts 3, 4, 5 times a day to try to get an idea of when the best time to put out my bees are. There's really a sweet spot, and that sweet spot for the first males is right around that middle of March day that's above 55 degrees with some promising 50 to 55 degree weather following it. And so here I have, March 12th circled. It's 57 degrees. That's a good day to start my bees. And that's a good day to start my bees, providing I have some nectar resources available in the yard. That needs to be accounted for too. So we're kind of matching some variables. In March, once I find that day, the males are going to start to emerge. Are you seeing the video here?
Yes, and hearing it.
And you're hearing it. Thanks, Kate. Kate and I practiced this yesterday, and we were like, how do we actually get sound? Well, there's a little magic button on Zoom before you share that you gotta press to get sound. You can hear that little crinkling sound. That's those little mandibles on those males just chewing out of there. And it can actually get really loud. You can actually hear a release box from far away with all their little chews. And they look like little jumping beans or something. All those cocoons kind of move around, and it's just a really neat display of life. And the males are so stinking cute, you see this like one with his beard coming out of the cocoon. They're fun, and they're all kind of clumsy when they come out for a bit. And it's oftentimes not super warm. It's just like in the mid 50s, so they take a little while to pump the fluid into their abdomen and get some heat in them before they can take off. So one of the things that I try to put in my garden to varying levels of success is winter heath. And if you're somebody who's into bees and really into loving to watch spring emerge, you probably have planted winter heath or enjoy winter heath. It's planted all around in ornamental settings and corporate gardens, things like that around here. It ends up being like a killer early season bee plant, and that's what powers a lot of the male blue orchard bees that I have. It can be a tough plant to grow in certain situations and a really easy plant to grow in other situations. I find it kind of tough, actually. I have to do a lot of work to get it going, but the rewards are great. It also attracts a lot of early season bumblebees, and it blooms sometimes like around Christmas. And so if you have a warm day in early January or so, you can get bumblebees on your winter heath, which is a lot of fun. So I encourage you to plant that. You can get it at just about any nursery or big box store even this time of year. But the real deal, the real timing effort for my bees is the big leaf maples. And I have a wonderful forest on my property. It's mostly deciduous, which is rare for the Northwest, right? We kind of live in the Douglas fir world, but Douglas this is actually a big leaf maple, in this tall one right in the middle is flanked by other big leaf maples of smaller sizes, and you do see like a Douglas fir lurking up there on the right, but it's totally in bloom. But our eyes don't really notice it a whole lot. We're not really attracted to it like as a glorious, blooming flower of springtime, like a cherry tree. With bowls that are 6 feet wide down near the ground level around it. And so it's millions and millions of flowers, and it's just bee heaven up there. Tons of pollen, tons of nectar. So I time my release of the females for when I start to see those very first big leaf maples coming out. And so the males are set up to go a little earlier, so they're ready. They're staking out their territories. The females, I take them out of the fridge, and I put them out with those big leaf maples, and it's good times. So here's a female. She is she's sticking her head out of the cocoon here, and I'm going to get to when she actually emerges. There we go. I love just sitting watching the bees come out of the cocoons. And you see their hair is kind of unkempt. They need to do some grooming before they can fly. They're a little clumsy. They got to get their earth feet on. All right, so there's a female coming out of the cocoon, and this is a female at the beautiful flowers of a big leaf maple. And these are the flowers that a lot of us, just don't notice. I know personally, I didn't notice these flowers until I was trying to figure out what kind of pollen these bees were coming back with. And I was like, oh my gosh, they're coming back with the big leaf maple pollen. You can see that pollen all loosely all over her before she grooms herself and puts it on the underside of her abdomen. But those flowers, that's one small flower cluster on a giant tree. It's 100 feet tall and 60 to 70 feet wide. All right, the season goes on. I fill up tons of nests with the big leaf maples. And here's a little video, just some of the activity. Some music. This is an apple tree. These are all females that you're seeing, but you're going to see a male in a moment. There's a male. Look at those longer antennae, slimmer body. All right. So that's the good times rolling. All right, so to get that, to get the successful colonies, there's successful colonies, to get your numbers up and keep your bees healthy, there's a lot of work that needs to start happening in the month of May. Usually April is free of a lot of work. I can just sit back and relax and enjoy the bees. But for some reason in May starts big time parasite control efforts. These parasites can wreak a lot of havoc on your numbers. I guess they're natural, right? So to some extent, they're part of the ecosystem. But if your aim is to just increase your numbers and increase your numbers of bees, you want to do some work on trying to control some of the threats to those bee numbers. So this is a sapphire wasp, and they look so cool. Boy, I love the world of wasps. I know wasps get a bad name, but it's only because of 3 species that bother humans. There are tens of thousands of species of wasp in this world, and they all come with their own stories. Most of their stories aren't pestically bothering humans or stinging your children or anything like that. So really, if you want some fascination, get into the world of wasps. This is a sapphire wasp. So cool. They look like a F-35 fighter jet. But they're a big problem with blue orchard bees. They're just like one of those parasites. And then they're parasites. The Houdini fly, which is common now if you read a little bit about mason bee efforts, for in modern, one of the big issues now is the Houdini fly was imported, and here's just a picture I took of a blue orchard bee flying into her nest in the evening. they can fly late into the night. They don't mind cool temperatures. They don't mind the sun being down sometimes. Blue orchard bees stay pretty active and productive even at those edges of the day. All right, so if you're a blue orchard beekeeper and the season ends, you sometimes, if you're me, you move on to other species of bees that you're raising, and you also start to take down all your efforts from the blue orchard bees. And so I have this barn shed, and every one of those nests, tens of thousands, go into this barn shed, and the bees are growing up in there, inside of their tubes and paper straws and Phragmites reeds and laminate bee boards. This is what's happening. And this is actually, I got this off of Google Creative Commons. I think it's a European species of mason bee, perhaps the red mason bee, which is kind of their equivalent of Osmia lignaria, or the blue orchard bee, out in their neck of the woods. You can see that the egg hatches, the upper left is where it all starts. And you can see there's like a little caterpillar-like larva in there with a whole lot of pollen. And as time goes on, so we move from left to right, the larva, the little caterpillar thing, gets bigger while the pollen amount gets smaller, eventually leading up to a time when the larva spins a whole kind of fuzzy, hairy cocoon around itself. And then that's where the development into a bee begins, into what we would recognize as a bee versus recognize as a little caterpillar. All right, so in September, after the development happens, and the bees, the larva is just kind of sedentary in its cocoon. It's time to start harvesting. And this is the lion's share of all of the efforts of the year. This takes an extraordinary amount of time. And some people find this really tedious and boring and want to avoid it. But if you want to have successful mason bees, or you want to be successful with raising the numbers of your mason bees, then this is something you have to do. You have to sit yourself in a cold garage or a shed and be miserable for months, pulling the bees out of their reeds, out of their tubes. There's certain ways to do it that are faster than others, but certainly the most laborious is these natural reeds, which is, it's kind of stinks because the bees love these natural reeds the most. You're going to have the most success with these, just hands down. You're going to raise more bees. You're going to raise healthier, bigger, stronger bees in natural reeds. They're very expensive to buy from the people who sell them, the companies that sell them, and they're very laborious to crack open, but you're really going to get a good quality set of bees out of those. Plus, the bees are going to be in natural reeds. They're not going to have as many parasites because it's really hard for parasites to bust into the edges of a natural reed, if not impossible. All right, so I'm harvesting those out. That takes months. And then this is for all the people, if you're a little queasy about looking at things that look dirty and natural and sort of weird, you gotta, this is maybe close your eyes, but this is an interesting sensory experience where you have to clean your bees in a bleach and water solution. A lot of people think this is weird. Like, why would I dip my precious bees in bleach? And they don't do it. And if you don't do it, your bees are going to be chock full of parasites the next year. And your bee numbers that you worked so hard for and paid money for, they're not going to pan out. And then after 2 or 3 years, you're going to have no really successful, healthy bees left. So you got to do this. And I'm sorry if anyone needs to go to the bathroom from the sounds of this. It's kind of weird. But it's like 10-15 minutes of cleaning your bees in bleach. It smells funny, feels funny, absolutely necessary. You got to do it. Don't bypass that. All right, so once the bees are all cleaned, then all that work harvesting is done. and the bees go in the fridge. And if you're interested in storing your bees in the fridge, which is a good thing to do if you want to time their release for certain plant life that you have around you, especially if you got big leaf maples or if you have a big orchard. These are some wonderful, I don't want to like give an endorsement to a product on this, but this, I'm not going to, I don't even know the name of it, but on Etsy, mason bee containers for mason bee storage containers. I just love these things. They're really reasonably priced, and I really like using them. And they're reusable year after year, and they control the humidity really great. So check those out. So I store them in the fridge along with my wife's kombuchas and orange juice. Bees and kombucha, they go together. All right. At that point, the season last year is over, and this year is on. So, well, I don't know if I really can say that now that I think about it, because I'm cleaning these boards from last year. I have so many bee boards. I have like 100 of them, and each one of them I have to blast fire into each hole to clean them out. You see me with a little butane torch there, and I go through it every day. I clean out like 2 or 3 of these, and it all adds up before the season begins. And as I clean them out, I put rubber bands around them, and I put them up onto the shelves, and they're ready to go for this season. So that's what I do right now. That's happening every day. Then it's go time. Here's a couple of my release containers out by the kiosk in early spring. Obviously, this must have been a day where there was good weather and I had them out there, even though it's kind of cloudy. Sometimes they'll emerge a little bit in the clouds. And just think a few weeks from now, the big leaf maples are blooming. You can see a big leaf maple in the background there, light green and in bloom. This is what it's like. And it's just a sea of bees. You sit by that kiosk, it's like anything within 20-foot radius, you got bees like crashing into you. So what do I get out of this? I'm not a grower. I have a couple of apple trees. I realize that a lot of times we're interested in what's in it for us, for our human value of things and what we want to procure as a product for ourselves. But really, the one thing I get out of this is I get a really cool place to have a beer after work. I do all this work so I can have this moment right here. I can just sit by my bee hotel and soak it in, because all this work amounts to me creating my own little Serengeti, right in my own semi-rural backyard. And it's just awesome. And I know there's a lot of talk about raising these things for pollination, but I raise them for fun too. I probably wouldn't be here, and be a founding member of the Bee Society if it wasn't for discovering the blue orchard bee. It was a really big catalyst for my own interest in bees. And I imagine there's a lot of us here that can tell that same story. And so I encourage you to raise a few because they're fun. Yeah, there's benefits for them, but one of the great things about nature is it's full of wonder, and mason bees certainly provide that. And it's worth all the work.